Hey gang, and welcome back. These videos are brought to you by Card Conduit, the best place to sell your unused collection fast and easily. 401 Games, Canada's top shop for all your hobby and TCG needs. Dragon Shield, the strongest sleeves for your strongest decks. Moxfield, the easiest way to store and share your deck lists. And Foil Armor, flatten your foils fast. Desmond wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays an Urborg. Eric plays a forest and taps it to cast Utopia Mycon. Benoit has a plains, or should I say scrubland for turn. Kuzno has a plains as well, tapping it for Soul's Attendant. Desmond plays a swamp and pays 2 for a Jet Medallion. Eric's upkeep has a counter going on the Mycon, and he plays a forest in his main phase. He then plays a Soul Ring, and follows that up with a Rampant Growth. He passes to Benoit while searching for a land. Benoit's got a Plains for turn, and pays 2 for a Tome of Legends. It comes in with a counter on it. Kuzno has a Plains, and casts a Charming Prince in his main phase. He gains 1 life as it enters from Soul's Attendant, and just so you know, it will happen with every other creature, I just don't want to narrate it over and over again. Picks the mode to scry 2. He then goes to combat and hits Desmond for 1. Desmond draws and misses his land drop, but at least is able to cast the reduced costing Gix thanks to the Jet Medallion. Eric brings out Shroofus Sproutsire in his main phase, and then casts Gaia's Blessing, shuffling his Rampant Growth into his library and drawing a card. It's a forest, which he plays and then passes turn. Benoit has a plains and just passes. Kuzno's turn has him drawing and going straight to combat. He swings the Prince at Eric and the Attendant at Benoit. They both connect, and Kuzno loses 2 and draws 2 from the Gix's triggers. He then plays a Plains for turn, and follows up with the Distinguished Conjurer. Desmond draws, and goes at Kuzno with Gix. He takes the hit for 3 commander damage, and Desmond loses 1 and draws a card from the Gix trigger. In his second main phase, Desmond then casts Thrill Kill Assassin, but immediately sacrifices it as part of Diabolic Intent's cost. He tutors for a card, and surprisingly doesn't have a land to play, and just passes after that. Eric adds another counter to his Mycon in his upkeep, and plays a Garden of Freylies, taking 3 so it comes in untapped. He then taps out to cast a Preposterous Proportions. This has his board getting pumped by +10/+10, and he swings Shroofus at Kuzno, and the Minot at Benoit. Before moving to blocks, Benoit activates the Tome, removing a counter and drawing a card. Kuzno gets in on this action, casting March of the Otherworldly Light, and exiles 2 cards to exile Shroofus, and prevent Eric from getting a massive amount of Saproling tokens. Benoit isn't so lucky, and takes the 10. Eric then loses 1 to the Gix trigger from his Minot hitting Benoit, and draws a card, and passes after that. Benoit has a Plains for turn, and taps out in his main phase for Elenda. As she comes in, he gets to add a counter onto his Tome, and passes to Kuzno. Kuzno plays a Plains, and spreads out his creatures, swinging 1 apiece at each opponent. Each opponent takes their hit, with Kuzno losing 2 and drawing 2 from the Gix triggers that aren't hitting Desmond. Kuzno's second main phase then has a Panharmonicon coming in, and he passes turn. Desmond plays a swamp, and then casts Soul Ring. He then pays enough, including 6 life loss, for Kirik. We then see Desmond paying 2 more life for Tiny Bones, and Kirik gains a +1/+1 counter. Desmond then loses 2 more life to cast Reanimate, and targets Necropolis Regent, losing 6 more. Not to mention giving Kirik another +1/+1 counter. Desmond then pays more life to help cast Drana, Liberator of Malakir, with Kirik gaining a 3rd +1/+1 counter. Going to combat, Gix goes at Kuzno, who takes a hit for 3. This has the Revenant triggering, giving Gix 3 +1/+1 counters, and Desmond loses 1 and draws a card. He then passes, and during the end step, Eric removes the counters from the Minot to make a 1/1 Saproling token. Eric gets a Spore counter in his upkeep on the Minot, and then casts Life and Limb in his main phase. 3 mana and sacrificing the sapling token get Eric enough to recast Shroofus again, and he passes after that. Benoit's Elenda also gains a +1/+1 counter from seeing the token hit the yard. Benoit plays his first swamp of the game, and draws a card from the tome after removing a counter. He then swings Elenda at Kuzno, who connects. This has him gaining 2 life, and then loses 1 to Gix's trigger and draws. Benoit then casts a Buried Alive in his second main phase, and goes to find 2 creatures. He puts Hakon and Legion Lieutenant into his graveyard, and passes after that. Kuzno's turn has him playing a Plains, and casting Solemn Simulacrum, gaining 4 life as it comes in, and going to find 2 basics to put into play tapped. He then swings the Attendant at Benoit, who takes the hit. This has Kuzno losing 1, and drawing a card from Gix, and passing after that. Desmond untaps and draws. He plays a Swamp for turn, and loses 2 more life to help cast Rev, Tithe Extractor. Once she's out, he then loses 4 more life to help cast Grey Merchant of Asphodel. This drains his opponents for 14 each, and gains him the meaning of life worth of life. Going to combat, Gix goes at Eric, and the rest that can attack go at Kuzno. With his creatures attacking, Rev triggers, and Desmond gives Keurig Death Touch. Drana then hits first because of First Strike, pumping his board by a +1/+1 counter, plus Drana gets 2 +1/+1 counters from the Revenant trigger. He also loses 1 and draws a card from Gix. We then move to normal damage, and Kuzno's blocked Keurig's and Tiny Bones. Desmond then gains life from Keurig's lifelink, Tiny Bones is taken out, and he gets to exile the top cards of the players he hits libraries. The remaining creatures connect also get pumped by the Revenant, and Desmond loses some life to draw some cards with Gix's triggers. Elenda also gets bigger from seeing creatures get taken out. In his second main phase, he then pays 2 life to help cast Blood Artist, with Keurig getting another +1/+1 counter. He passes after that. Eric untaps and draws, casting an Arcane Signet in his main phase. He then plays Friend to All Green Tokens deck with Champion of Lamholt, and he moves to combat swinging his commander and remaining 4 Saprolings at Kuzno. Kuzno can't block because of the Champion ability, and all of Eric's creatures connect. This is Eric then resolving the Gix triggers 1 by 1, stopping after drawing 2 cards, and he makes 4 more Saproling tokens, which in turn gives the champion 4 +1/+1 counters. He then plays a Forest, which is also a Saproling as you'll remember, and the champion gains another counter. Eric then sacrifices 4 Saproling tokens, which has Elenda gaining that many counters, and uses the mana to cast Saren. With Saren coming in, the champion gains another +1/+1 counter, and Eric passes. Benoit's turn has him drawing, and playing a Reliquary Tower as his land for turn, and then goes to combat. He swings Elenda at Kuzno, who takes the hit for 9. This has Benoit gaining 9 life, and then losing 1 to draw from Gix. Benoit then quickly counts up the creatures on board, and puts to stack a Wrath of God after realizing he can't get drained out completely from the Blood Artist triggers. The board is then wiped, and Eric is heavily set back, losing most of his lands that are also creatures, and Desmond then drains Benoit with all of the Blood Artist triggers, putting him to 3. With Elenda getting taken out, Benoit also makes a bunch of vampire tokens. He's not done though, activating the tome, drawing a card, and then passes turn. Kuzno has a Plains for turn, and he casts a Wall of Omens, drawing 2 cards as it enters. We then see Preston finally hitting the board, and he passes after that. Desmond's just got a Swamp, and he casts one of the stolen cards with Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. He then recasts Gix, and passes. Eric draws and is a little stuck on what he can do. He does have enough mana to at least cast Questing Beast. And after it resolves, he hits Desmond for 4, and passes. Benoit has a Swamp, and casts his own Elish Norn, but with the Grand Cenobite version. He moves to combat, swinging his now 3/3 lifelink vampires at Desmond. Before moving to blocks, Kuzno channels Touch the Spirit Realm, and exiles the stolen Elish Norn on Desmond's side. She'll come back at the end of turn, but under her owner's control, meaning Kuzno's. Desmond then takes the hit from the vampires, with Benoit gaining some much needed life. He then passes, and during the end step, Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, comes back under Kuzno's side. Kuzno draws and plays a Plains. We then see a Feldar Guardian coming in, which gives him a bunch of blink triggers. He targets 3 lands and Wall of Omens. This is where things get a bit nutty, because with the wall coming back in, it triggers Preston upon entering. Elesh Norn and Panharmonicon also love enter the battlefield triggers, and after some math, we come to the conclusion that Kuzno is drawing a total of 20 cards, but the token that Preston makes immediately hits the graveyard because of Benoit's Elesh Norn. Benoit is then very sad to see his Elesh Norn go, as Kuzno uses Swords to Plowshares to exile it. Kuzno then follows up with Phyrexian Altar, one of my absolute favorite sacrifice outlets, and it got me wondering, what's yours? Leave a comment down below. Anyway, he then sacrifices the Wall of Omens to help cast a now useful Evangel of Heliod. This gets even more nutty, and suffices to say, Kuzno makes a lot of 1/1 soldier tokens. He then sacrifices 2 of them to cast Flicker of Fate, and bounces the Evangel, which comes back, and triggers Elesh Norn, Panharmonicon, and Preston makes a token copy of it, which in turn triggers all of those again as well. This results in even more tokens. He then sacrifices a few of them to cast Mage's Attendant, making a bunch of wizard tokens. More soldiers are then sacrificed to the greater good to help Kuzno cast Moonshaker Cavalry. His board is then massively pumped and gains flying, and he swings Preston at Desmond and Elesh Norn at Benoit to take them out. Kuzno then moves through his phases, discarding down to 7 and passing. Eric draws, but with only 4 mana and no answer, knows when he's beat and scoops it up. Game review time. So this game was about 50 minutes long, and it was a good one because everyone got to cast their commander and essentially do what their commander wanted to do. Preston made illusion copies, Gix made everyone lose life and draw cards, Shroofus did shroofing things and made saprolings, and Elenda got big and then blew herself up and made a bunch of little lifelinking vampire tokens. I will say that I think the best card this game was probably Gix, despite the fact that Panharmonicon, Elesh Norn, and the Moonshaker Cavalry basically won Kuzno the game. I'm not disputing this, but I don't think he would have drawn into them as easily if their Gix wasn't out and drawing everyone so many cards per attack step. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.